Ready.
Hi there, it's Tad Hargrave from Marketing for Hippies. I'm here with my friend Kakisimo Iskwew, also known as Natalie Pepin. She has her Instagram handle is Meeting My Ancestors, and website is
meetingmyancestors.com.
There we go. So Natalie and I have known each other for at least a decade now or more, and she does really beautiful work around reskilling, helping people connect with their ancestry through their hands, particularly their Métis ancestry. And so there have been some amazing things in terms of her marketing and how she's gone about it that I think are very instructive. We're just here at a friend's house helping them with their moving and cleaning process, so we thought we'd take a moment just to share some of this. So maybe if you want to come in, Sterling, and then so how what would you say in terms of the marketing and how your journey's been with it?
Well, I think to understand the marketing that I've done, it's important to understand why did I even do any of this to begin with. And so for me, sharing traditional skills, it came about because that's just what I was already doing. It's what I loved doing, and that was just a big part of my life. And so when I kind of stumbled onto this niche and what it is I do for a living now by gathering skills myself for my life, because it's what helped me feel connected to my ancestry, to my history, and it was just a really healing thing to learn our arts and to practice them, to begin with beadwork, making moccasins. Tanning hides was a pretty big one for me. It was really special for me to learn and to practice. And so it all started in my personal journey, and then I moved north from Calgary. I was actually teaching business in Calgary and moved north to the Tuatna Valley, which is about an hour and a half north of Edmonton. And when I got there, these skills and sharing these skills, it was a way for me to connect with community. So what I had done in Calgary before moving up is I had offered reskilling events for the general public. I was very naive, and Facebook was kind of a new thing to me. And so I just posted something on Facebook in a public group to say, I'm going to make soap, and I'm going to make moccasins, and I'm going to tan some hides, some rabbit skins. And if you want to learn how to do this, just come over to my house. Here's my address. And so people showed up. And looking back, it's almost an embarrassing thing to admit that I just put my address on Facebook and said, show up at my house, random people. But they did, and some of those people became really good friends. And so it was community building. It was encouraging people to, instead of go out and shopping on like Boxing Day, to come and learn a new skill and to be a producer in their life. So when I got up to the Tuatna Valley, which is about half an hour south of Athabasca, I did the exact same thing. I just went to all the Facebook groups for the community and posted this and said, if you want to learn how to spin wool, make moccasins, make soap, make cheese, all these different things, just show up. I'm, the blue house at the top of the hill. And so again, random people I had never met showed up, and it was amazing. And I got to know my neighbors. I, again, was able to build community that way. And what I realized in that process is that other people actually, wanted to learn these things, that it was something that resonated with people, those ancestral roots. And, these skills, they're not just necessarily tied to my culture. These are human skills that almost every culture practiced some variation thereof. Every culture has tanned hides. Every culture has their forms of soap, their traditional arts. And so sharing these things, what I realized is just how much it meant to people, that they actually really wanted to learn these things. And I didn't know that would be the case. And then eventually I decided I would offer classes. So that was a big leap for me, and I made many mistakes with my marketing. So the first iterations of this was just, making it an event on Facebook, and it was really trial and error to see, well, what do people even want? So if something didn't sell quickly, I just canceled it, because there's no reason for me to put my effort into something that nobody wants to do. And so that's a really important thing with marketing, for feedback. If people are not responding well, don't do that thing anymore or change it. And so, but there was specific ones that was just overwhelmingly positive, the response, which was beadwork, learning to do traditional Métis beadwork, making moccasins, and tanning hides. And anytime I would put those up, and I had to tweak things. At first I was offering them up where I was near Athabasca, and there was good response, but it wasn't like overwhelming. But then when I started offering these things in Edmonton, it was an overwhelming response, because a lot of these land-based skills, they happen out of the city. You don't have access to them necessarily in the city. And so those were selling out.
So you were doing these workshops in Edmonton?
In Edmonton, yeah. And the response was amazing. There's Edmonton is a very Métis community. Like, you go back in our history, this is an important place for our nation, and there's a lot of Métis people and urban Métis people who are not necessarily connected to their culture anymore. And they know, intellectually they know that that's what nation they're affiliated with, and maybe they wear moccasins every now and then, but they just didn't have those connections. And at first, those classes, I was just teaching the hard skills. Like, I was showing them physically how to tan a hide, bead, make moccasins. And then over time, people would respond and they say, that little story you told us about, the moccasins and using them as a marker for the buffalo when they'd go hunting, throwing something with a very specific beadwork design down to say whose animal, whose kill that was. They're like, that was so meaningful. And as I added more of these things and more stories and more history from our nation, the feedback was overwhelming. I would get emails and phone calls of people crying, saying how much it meant to them. And so I stumbled into this side of things. And obviously I can talk. And so I was like, oh, they want to listen to me talk. Great, I can do that. And so eventually these offerings became much more about culture and connecting people to their culture, while learning the skill. That the skill is the doorway to what they're really looking for, which is stories, songs, connection,
Do you think
history.
they knew that when they were coming, or did they just think, no, I'm coming for the skill, and they were sort of surprised and delighted by the cultural part?
Yeah. No, they totally thought they just wanted to learn to bead. And so all of these little bits, it was the meaningful connection that the art allowed them space for. And so eventually I actually started marketing these things to Indigenous people, because originally I did not market them to Indigenous people. We'd have like a 50-50, 60-40 split of Indigenous people to people who just really wanted to learn the art form and come for, to be an ally, come for an event. And so I completely rebranded the company at that point, when I realized, oh, this is an opportunity for Indigenous people, for Métis people, to actually connect with their culture through some of the stories. I know some of the stories. I can share those. I know some songs. I have a little bit of language. I have a deep connection with the art and the history. And so by weaving an experience for them, using all of those components, it became an overwhelmingly well-received offering. And so that's become the whole foundation of what I do now. So I rebranded to specifically offer these things for Indigenous people who are disconnected from culture. And that was a big moment. Everything changed for my business then.
Well, and just before we hit that, because I know a lot of people watching won't be from Canada, may not even know who Métis people are, so maybe just the brief story there.
Yeah, so the Métis Nation is a nation that was birthed on the prairies, just west of the woodlands in Ontario, and our homeland spans from the very, very western part of Ontario all the way to the very, very eastern part of British Columbia and across the prairies. So also in the United States and through Canada. However, in the United States, Métis people are known by different names, typically Chippewa. The histories of the states, both the United States and Canada, is different in those regards. So we're not known as the same thing everywhere, but in Canada we became known as Métis. And one of my great uncles, Cuthbert Grant, he was the first leader of our nation. So our nation was born from different roots. And so we have our European roots, so typically they were French or Scottish fathers, and typically Ojibwe or Cree or Saulteaux, which is very related nations, mothers, and so some people think, oh well, Métis means you're half European, half Indigenous. No, that was the original combination. However, a nation was born out of that. We have our own language, we have songs, we have stories, we have political structures, we have our own arts. We have a very distinct culture that grew from, you know, that moment back in the 1700s where all these people of this common heritage and had common experiences converged in the Red River Valley and created a culture and a society there. So that's what it means to be Métis, and there's a very complicated history thereafter, but that's in a nutshell.
And so then this nation was formed, and there are all these people, some of whom still identify very strongly with it, some maybe peripherally aware. And you know, there's Facebook groups, I suppose there's hashtags. Where were you finding them? Where did they mostly hang out, or how did you start coming across them?
Yeah, well, an interesting thing about the nation, so there's like what we call the stolen generations, which is where people just stopped identifying as Métis. If they didn't have to, they didn't, because A, it was dangerous. Like, especially in Manitoba, you could just openly kill Métis people. And this did happen, including within my family, because they were viewed as traitors and rabble rousers, you know, just...
Take two.
So there was this period, because there was so much animosity towards Métis people, where families had just essentially gone into hiding, and they call it hiding in plain sight. You just identified as a different culture. So we have families who called themselves Italian. We had families who called themselves Portuguese. I've heard Filipino, like I've heard so many different, like whatever you looked physically as, you just pretended to be that. And then a few decades ago, about when I was born in the 80s, a lot of families reclaimed their culture and started to invest in learning about who they were, because the language was nearly lost. Traditions, artwork, those things were not practiced anymore because it was dangerous to identify as Métis. And so in the 80s especially, there was a huge resurgence, and so a lot of people know who they are. Some people just found out, like within one generation ago, they, you know, oh, that language that grandpa spoke, it wasn't Cree, it was Michif, or that's what he meant when he said Michif. And so all these things that were hidden from their children and grandchildren started to become understood, and people started to join groups. And before Facebook and all these online groups, they would just like have little associations. But because so many people now understand that A, they are Métis, and B, they don't know anything about their history or culture, we have a lot of groups on Facebook that have popped up. And because people are deeply interested in it and not sure where to turn. And so where did I find these groups? I type in Métis in the search bar on Facebook, and they all come up. And I happen to be a member of a lot of those groups already, because that is part of who I am also.
And so then you were starting to put these things out to those communities, those groups, and what was the response? What did you find?
Well, I had freshly rebranded everything specifically for Indigenous people and specifically for Métis people who wanted to have that connection to culture. And so the programs I was putting out there first was arts programs, and I had kind of grouped all these arts into these big offerings that would last a year long. And it was arts classes, including the beadwork and the moccasin making and just all the arts in one program. But it also included little tidbits of culture and language and foods and all these other things. And so by putting these things all together into a program and giving a little bit every week, that's what I was actually putting out there, was those year-long programs. And the response was just, I wasn't even prepared for the response. I had this goal for this first program that I would get 15 people in the program. And I thought, if I could get 15 people in the program, it's worth it for me to do this. And I had 30. And so I had doubled my expectation. And from what the feedback as we first got the program started was just tears every week when we would meet, and just so much gratitude that these things were actually being offered and online, because so many people just can't drive 2 hours to go to something. They have families, they have lives, and there's huge barriers, you know, when it comes to travel, cost, just making time in life with everything else we have going on. And so
all right, we're just changing the angle because our cameraman Sterling's arms were turning into jello holding the camera. So, where were we?
The response to the
right.
programs.
You wanted to get 15, but you got 30. And did you notice after that, was there a good word of mouth that got spread as a result?
Yeah, I didn't really have to do much sharing, and still to this day, when I post things, I'll share it, to all these different groups once or twice, and usually it just gets shared through, word of mouth, through community. But the best, one of the things that I am so humbled by, and it's just an incredible feeling, is I stumble upon the word of mouth happening on Facebook all the time, where I haven't posted something, somebody will ask a question and somebody else will answer, oh, you should check out Meeting My Ancestors, they have this great program I'm in, and I can't recommend it highly enough. And so it's really incredible, the word of mouth, actually. The one thing that I hear about the word of mouth is when people go to the website, I have this letter to the people who are there, who are considering the programs, and I talk to them really in a really raw way about what it's like to be looking for culture and to have been disconnected, and what you're hoping to find, and how hard it can be sometimes, because a lot of people are really closed about culture and talking about it. So I see actually people referencing that letter sometimes of, oh, just go read the program page letter and see if it's a fit for you. So yeah, it's been pretty overwhelming and amazing and beautiful.
There's so many things that you probably are hearing them all already. So to take it into marketing lingo, we've got the niche first of all. So first of all, there's already a niche of doing beading, hide tanning, moccasin making. This already sort of implies a certain niche in terms of what's being done. But then deciding to offer it to the Indigenous community, particularly the Métis community within that, allows a lot of things. One is you can speak directly to these people and the experience they're having. Second is there are hubs for it. There are places where they're already hanging out and connecting. And third, because it's an existing community, you get word of mouth that spreads within it. Word of mouth doesn't just spread. People don't just walk down the street screaming out their favorite, deli in town. They talk to their friends, and so word of mouth tends to spread in a community. And so if you have a community already that's already built and that exists and that you're tapping into, the word will spread faster. And of course, what we've also got here is it goes without saying that word of mouth only happened. This wouldn't be happening if Natalie's programs were terrible. If they were no good and her stories were boring and off topic and people didn't really learn a skill, then nobody's talking about it, even if it's really niched and you're reaching out to all the right hubs. So word of mouth has it. There's three kind of keys to word of mouth. One, you make it remarkable. Two, you make it easy for people to spread the word. Easy to remember URL. meetingmyancestors.com. Easy. And she's got a presence on Instagram, so people can share there. And then you make it worthwhile, of course, just saying thank you and acknowledging when it happens. And but the most of that is that you make it really remarkable, which is what she's done. One of the other things I think is just so worth speaking to here, I often talk about for people who are in the healing arts, that your deepest wound is often a doorway to your truest niche. The things you've struggled with the most end up being where you can help the most. And so there's something about when you have an authentic connection to the community, because I see sometimes entrepreneurs saying, aha, I'll reach this community. I say, but do you have any connection to that community? Are you a part of it? And no, they're not. And it's not wrong, it can still be done, but it's going to be harder because you don't know the lingo, you don't really know the story, the experiences of these people, so that's a lot of work. But if you're already a part of the community, then you already know what the Facebook groups are because you're already in them, you're already a part of the associations, you already have a lot of these connections, which just makes everything much easier and more authentic. And also I know with Natalie, part of the reason she's had such a response, and I think it will continue to grow for her, is that her roots are very real in this community. She spent this summer traveling, to ceremonies and supporting elders, and it's even what she's doing today, helping here, and has also run a lot of food sovereignty camps huge money makers. Those food sovereignty groups, huge money makers.
Huge costs.
Yeah. So of course, but all this giving to the community, you know, there's a kind of credibility. You know, you can just put the camera right on the. So we're chopping this up, it keeps stopping recording on us. So I'm recording this video because in the spring, when was it? March?
Yeah.
In March, Natalie's home burned down. She had a tiny home and everything in it burned with it. And so she's in the process of building a new home, and she's got a fundraiser for it. And so this would be my ask, is if you would join me in contributing to this this fund. She's working to raise $25,000. She's got about $1,800 as of the moment, and every dollar will be going to supplies to build a home for her and her family that they can be living in, to continue the good work, so that they can be on the land out there, as opposed to, you know, living in the city or living off the land, you know, which is difficult given that all the work that she does there, and animals. We've still got sheep.
Still got sheep and chickens and cattle and one pig left.
So I hope you'll join me. You know, I know a lot of us are passionate about supporting, you know, Indigenous people and Indigenous causes and work, and what Kakisimo Iskwew here is doing is so beautiful. I've just seen it flourishing over the last year, people coming together on our land, doing these Indigenous food sovereignty camps, learning about food, learning about traditions around food, song, working with, you know, traditional plants and in traditional ways, learning how to do things in a ceremonial and beautiful way. So I'm such a fan of her and her work. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll share this video up. There's some really good marketing lessons here, but there's also an opportunity to support some beautiful work happening to make the world a little bit more of a beautiful place. So I'll put the link around here, probably in the comments of the video. And if you have any thoughts about places to spread the word on this, you know, please let us know. And also please feel free to share this in any Facebook groups you're in, if you're in any groups around Indigenous allyship, or groups around, you know, where people you think might be aligned and interested. We'd be so grateful for you spreading the word. Hopefully there's been some good lessons in terms of marketing for this. And we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much.
Hey.